Welcome to the Choices, Chances, Changes show with your hosts, Georgie Dickins and Kit Tran. We are a dynamic podcast that explores the transformative power of personal and professional decisions. Today, we're so blessed to have Yuval Rooz, the co-founder and CEO of Digital Asset, a leading innovator in blockchain technology. Yuval, welcome to the show.
Good to be with you, Kit and Georgie.
Very nice to see you. And look, today, Yuval, we are going to explore a lot around your professional career. And I like to start by getting a sense of who are you when you're not your title. If we were to look you up on LinkedIn, we can see that you're a runner, you're a cycling enthusiast. I also know you love photography. But what is a lesser known fact about you that we wouldn't know?
That I'm a Texan by the accent. Well, it's true. I was born in Texas, but no, I grew up in Israel. To be honest, there is not much more time outside of work to be more than work at the moment. But yeah, as you said, I think my outlets at the moment are cycling, running, and photography when there's time.
And I'm out of interest. How do you make time for your hobbies? Bearing in mind, it's about, as leaders, it's about being fit for purpose. How do you make sure you create time for the things that fuel you?
Sleep less, which I'm trying to do. Trying not to do. But I mean, there's a bicycle in the office. I take Zoom calls while cycling in the office. So double dipping into some of these things. Yeah, it's a challenge, generally speaking, and ebbs and flows. So there are times where there's more time for this, and then there's times where you need to give up on some of these activities.
I don't. Do you track your sleep?
I do.
I've got the ring. My husband's got the Whoop band, and I obsess over the data, which I don't think is always a good thing, because sometimes I'll look and it said, your recovery rate's low, and I'm like, but I feel really good. But do you track your data on the Whoop?
I do. Well, yeah. There's no hesitation. I do. I think that actually one actionable thing that came out of it is that now when I travel, I don't drink, because I've noticed that the time zone, the usually even crazier schedule when you travel, and then you top it up with the alcohol, is really screwing you up. So one outcome now is that when I travel, there's zero alcohol.
It's interesting you say that. I've only had this ring for a month, and what surprised me was how my heart rate variability, just with one glass of wine, not even a bottle, but like a glass, how that influences my system, and which is really annoying. But when you know better, you can do better. So I've kind of attuned to your way of thinking around being really mindful of when I drink, especially when traveling.
Yeah.
And out of interest, when you were 7 years old, what did you dream of becoming? When you didn't know necessarily about finance, what did the young Yuval want to do?
Well, as someone who didn't finish high school, I don't know if the young Yuval really knew what he wanted to do. Yeah, both of my parents are entrepreneurs, so maybe I think, if I had to give an answer, I always dreamt that I will create my own company. What specifically it would be, I don't, I can't say I had this clear vision as a young person. Funny enough, when I started my first job in finance, I didn't even know what the S&P 500 was. So you can't say that I even knew that I wanted to be in finance.
Okay, so you wanted to build businesses, and what was your first ever job before your first job in finance? What was your first ever paid job?
Waiting tables.
And what did it teach you about leadership?
Leadership. Well, it definitely taught me that I need to pay attention to people more. I was a very terrible waiter. I didn't serving clients was not my my gift early days, and I've had to learn how to become better at serving people at a later stage. But yeah, that was, I think, at the age of 15 or 14. That was the first time I started waiting table. Before that, I worked with my grandfather, but that was not really a job.
What was that?
My grandfather was an art dealer, so I used to spend my summers with him, helping him in the gallery.
And is that where the photography piece came in, or was that very?
Maybe no, mainly more for my mother. My mother is more of the artist person, and at a young age, she had a dark room, and I really liked playing the dark room. So that just got me into taking photos and then developing them myself.
Love that. And as you've ascended in your career, I'm sure you've had people that have really informed your journey, and we'll come to that later in the conversation. But what's a piece of advice that you've been given that's really stayed with you?
It's interesting because my former boss, Don Wilson, never gave it to me formally, so I've never been given the advice explicitly, but at least the observation, and to me, it's something that I find very appealing at a leader is always open-minded, and then criticizing the good and the bad equally, right? So you've at least for me, at least my personal experience at DRW, that the good and the bad were always criticized equally. There wasn't kind of personal favors, and that just generally speaking is something that really took a very serious created a very important impact on me, is this idea that as a leader, like, you just need to always be open-minded and not allow kind of like your ego or biases to impact how do you judge people. Much harder said than done. As so that to me is probably the biggest advice that I was never explicitly given, but just observed.
And how do you? That's a really. I love that about the open-mindedness. How do you look for that in people? Like when let's say you're bringing people into digital asset. How do you test for that to see if that's a quality that people bring?
Yeah, I don't. It's not necessarily. So the open-minded is more of what I look at the leaders, and again, I think that being open-minded is a big part of ego, right? Because open-minded implies that you don't allow yourself biases to allow you to kind of explore new ideas that you haven't thought about before. So generally speaking, I would say that being open-minded is kind of synonymous with either your low ego or high ego. Generally speaking, I would assume that people that have very strong ego will have a much harder time being open-minded because they just think they're right all the time.
And do you think open-mindedness, as you were speaking there, it reminded me of Ted Lasso. I don't know if you've seen the TV series, but it's about this. Have you seen it, either of you?
I haven't. I'm aware of it, but no.
It's good. Like it's one of those ones.
It's a great show. Yeah.
And it's one of good leadership lessons. And he talks about be curious, non-judgmental. And I do think it's important to be judgmental, because as long as we all have to exercise judgment, but as you're speaking about open-mindedness, the word I suppose is coming up for me also is curiosity, because it's that curiosity that allows you to just check in terms of, are there any biases at play?
Totally. But I think it kind of all funnels back into, if you're just so confident in yourself and your ego is so strong, the curiosity also dies, because you're just kind of like, it's like an infinite loop that you just keep on reinforcing yourself, because you're just saying like, I'm just the best.
Yeah. But it also makes me think of that if you're open-minded, that you you can ensure you're not in that echo chamber. Because sometimes what I see when leadership teams are not, they can still be effective, but have they reached the heights they're destined to? It's because there's an echo chamber. You know, their ideas, the CEO's idea is a boomerang that's coming straight back to them.
Right.
Kiet, what's coming up for you?
Yeah, I am curious. How do you go from the waiting? By the way, I was a bad waiter as well. I had a bad waitering career. That was like my first job, and then I ended up becoming a bartender, which I was bad at as well. But hence we're all in finance. But how how do you get into finance from where you were? Like how you got started?
I mean, it's a pretty it's a pretty funny story. So I went to school at Georgia Tech. I studied electrical engineering. I come from a family that a good chunk of us are all engineers. I knew that I didn't want to be an engineer, but it was a prerequisite for my father that I will become an engineer. So I did it. And during a career fair towards the end of the degree, a person that saw that I'm a double E asked for my CV, and I was fortunate to have good grades. And he said I should apply. And I looked at his name tag and I asked, "What is Citadel?" And he said, "It's a hedge fund." And I said, "What is a hedge fund?" And he says, "Perfect, just apply." You're like, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for people like you. Um, so I asked a few friends, and they said, if Citadel asks you to apply, you should apply. And they knew what Citadel was. And I applied, and the first round was really just math and computer science questions. And it was probably one of the hardest interviews that I went through during that period of time. So I was like, okay, these people are very smart. And then I got asked to come to the final round in Chicago. They put you in the Four Seasons. They gave you a nice tour of Chicago. They had really nice offices. And then I got the offer, and it was significantly higher than anything else at the time. So I said, okay, they're rich and smart. And that's it. That was my calculus to go to Citadel. It wasn't, I said, for me, your first job out of school is important, but at the end of the day, it's really just kind of getting you into the workforce and kind of getting your, trying to figure out what's going on. And I was like, okay, well, if they're so smart and they're so successful, like that probably wouldn't be a bad place to start. So that's just really how I decided to join Citadel and get into finance. And I don't know if they still do that at the hedge fund, but they had a program where you effectively go through a crash MBA. They bring 5 professors from Northwestern and Chicago at that time, and you study finance in 2 months. And then you do 3 internships in 3 different desks, and that's it. So that's just kind of how I got into finance. Really stumbled on it.
Now, how did you go from that to really building one of the most complex, misunderstood business in tech around blockchain and crypto?
Well, we need to make it easily understood. Again, I think a lot of people are fortunate to have like this very clear kind of path, and they go and they execute. I think that for me, Citadel was an incredible place to start, and I'm actually very lucky to be now working again with Citadel. But back then, I was, a small cog in a big machine, and like I said, I've always wanted to kind of create things, and I a few years after I started, DRW started an ETF market making desk. And I had the opportunity to be one of the first people to kind of start that activity. So I joined DRW, and I was again very fortunate that a few years later I became the head of the group, and I was then fortunate that Don gave me the opportunity to start the venture team for DRW. So it's just kind of like moved more and more towards starting the business and being more entrepreneurial. And at around 2012-13, DRW, back to being open-minded, Don allowed a DRW partner to start what is today Cumberland Mining, which is one of the largest crypto OTC trading operations in the world. And I was doing the venture, so we were looking at investments in crypto already in 2013. And a few years later, we said, there's clearly going to be a need for something to serve enterprises. So this is already in 2014. And that's just kind of how Eric and myself, Eric is my co-founder, left DRW to start Digital Asset. So again, it wasn't that, I knew, 20 years ago what kind of business I want to start, but as part of the work at DRW during those years, we started realizing that there's going to be a gap. And the story have stayed the same. I think how we executed and got to where we are today has changed a few times over the years.
You talk about you and Eric founding the business, and I've read several articles in the past about the likes of Elon Musk and where they call like founder madness. There's a fine line between brilliance and craziness, and I wonder, how do you relate to that? Do you see any of that founder madness in yourself?
Do I see it? No, but I was actually going. I always thought about there's the saying, like, if the bumblebee knew that it's not supposed to fly, it wouldn't fly, but it doesn't, so it just flies. And I think that that's kind of the point. Is like I don't think that most founders would consider themselves crazy, but they're definitely doing something against the odds, which most people will say is crazy. So I don't necessarily think that what I'm doing is crazy, but I do recognize that it is painful and going against odds.
But it's interesting, the entrepreneurs that I've worked with, they have this unwavering belief. They can see that unmet future, and people will call them reckless, and yet there's they've got a clarity. They can visualize what the world is becoming.
Yeah, and that's my point, is I don't see that as crazy, but I can appreciate that a lot of other people will say what we're doing is going against the odds. And I can tell you that through the last 10 years, multiple times people have said, here you go, you see that it is going to fail. It's not going to work. And every time they come back, it's like, oh my God, this is still happening.
And out of interest, when people say that to you, like this, my words, but you're reckless, this is going to fail, how do you respond to that? Like, I suppose, how do you respond to those comments internally? Does that fuel you, or are you indifferent? Where does your thinking take you?
Oh, 100% it fuels me.
Yeah.
I'm always encouraged by those people.
Yeah.
What was some of the? Sorry, Georgie.
No, you go, Kiet.
No, I was curious. Like, what are some of the drivers that continue on that conviction that you have, right? Because you think about the early buzz of crypto was really around the retail space and the whole token space, right? It wasn't really around enterprise blockchain. Like, what were some of the pillars that anchored that conviction for you?
Yeah, listen, I think that when you look at some of the challenges that banks are going through right now, in terms of being able to stay competitive, when you see some of the companies that are crypto native and what they are capable of offering, when you look at DeFi and the ability to lend against assets at a fractional of a dollar, and you look at what it costs to do that in the traditional world, that gap is going to close. And even if that gap closes, Kit, by 5%, we're talking about tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars, right? Like the tax that is being paid in the system at the moment as a result of the inefficiency is so monumental. I can't even put a TAM against it, that you just don't need to be that smart to understand that it will be solved one way or another. And maybe with our technology, this is what my belief is, but I think that it's very hard to assume that this won't happen, and that's why, for me, I've seen it with just a handful of clients, and we're not talking about very simple implementation. They're very complicated, but as we know with technology, it's just going to get easier and easier and easier, and that's why, for me, if anything, the conviction has only got stronger over the years. If anything, it's in the early days, it was like, I'm pretty sure something will happen. Now, I'm certain it will happen.
And this is completely off piece, but it's not off piece, the question, because you said the word conviction. I did a talk to the sixth form was at one of my son's school recently on leadership. And one of the questions, which completely I hadn't anticipated, was the leaders you work with, do they believe in God? Do they have a religion? And I said, well, I think they have a religion with their idea, because there is, if we talk about belief and faith, they have a faith that they're going to achieve against the odds. But it did lead me to think about, do the leaders, do you, for example, have a spiritual practice? Do you meditate? Is there anything that you have that's very foundational to enable you, which is an enabler, to enable you to operate at the level that you do?
Are you, do I meditate? Yeah, I sometimes meditate, but it's not, I don't view it as spiritual, to be honest. To me, my religion when it comes to digital asset is my belief in what we're going to do. That is truly it. I'm very driven by the change that we can drive. I think that, a lot of times when I talk, I'll take it from a different perspective. I talk to a lot of people in crypto now that we announced around, and there's more crypto players in our sphere, and they ask, why have you taken this approach? Because we, specifically when you look at other crypto chains and things like that, we've taken a very different approach. We didn't sell any coins to retail to kind of create like a very big treasury that then we can go and pay for all kinds of things. So like I would say we've taken the really hard way to get to where we are, like extremely painful way. And they asked me, why did you do that? And this is where I get to your question, Georgie, is, I think that what drives myself, and some of our backers is we want to see what we have developed really, really actually mobilizing financial services in 50 years. And I think that it's not trying to solve for this like really short-term gain, but have a longer, bigger purpose that I think allowed us to endure and in some cases really suffer doing it the hard way rather than just, taking, the easy way in many cases. So that's, I think maybe, in terms of a higher cause, I think that, one thing that unifies, I think, myself and some of the leadership in this company and some of our backers is the mission is beyond just how do we create a very quick short-term success, but actually much more of a long-term impact.
I love that. And out of interest, what is one thing no one warned you about when it comes to being a founder? It's a bit like the reason I asked that, before I became a parent, no one told me the first 6 weeks were pretty horrendous. The lack of sleep. Everyone's like, it's going to be amazing. You're going to love every moment. I really didn't. But no one ever told me the truth. And I was wondering, when you stepped in, you dreamed, you said, from a 7-year-old, building a business, running a company. What is one thing no one told you, or one thing that surprised you?
Nobody warned me. I think that maybe this because as a founder, you really need to be optimistic all the time.
Yeah.
You need to be realistic about the challenges, but you have to be optimistic because like I said, there needs to be something that carries you against all the odds. And I think that this optimism is also assumes that everybody who invests or partners with you is on your side. That's just not true. And I think that that is something that you learn over the years, is that even those that you can or should be, based on, I would say, rational thinking as a founder. And I'm not saying that what they're doing is irrational, but when you think, hey, someone is partner with me, someone is investing in my company, they're on my side, right? And I think that that's a bit of a part of like, hey, I'm very optimistic. Oh, they partnered with it. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be great. And it's a bit naive, because again, depending on who are the investors or partners, sometimes they just want to be next to you because they want to know what you're going to do next, right? And again, I'm not saying that that's just happens all the time, but I think I see this now in a lot of founders, and they're like, oh my god, we're going to partner with this person, or this person is going to invest in me. And I'm like, okay. You do realize that what they're investing in you or what they're partnering with you is like tiny compared to their business. So you should just ask yourself, why are they doing it? Or at least just kind of be realistic that you're just not that important for them. And I think that that's the thing that probably nobody warned me is, and again, you could say, well, that's obvious, Yuval. But again, when you're starting and you're trying to become bigger, this optimism, it's like, oh my god, this big company just partnered with us, and you're like, this is going to be amazing. And then you're like, actually, I don't matter that much. And for them, it's like, it's okay. So that to me probably is the biggest lesson that I've learned that nobody warned me about.
That speaks to your open-mindedness to me. You said the question there, ask yourself, why are people investing? What's their motivation? It's I hear that open-mindedness piece coming through there as well.
Yeah, a lot of lessons learned there to be now open-minded about that.
Okay, what's coming up?
I guess the question for me is, there's leadership in terms of, managing a business, but in your case, it's leadership around managing a whole ecosystem, a whole community. So, I mean, what are some of the tips that you have in terms of leading a movement, right? Because you're just not leading a company; you're leading a whole movement.
Yeah, and I think that there's actually a lot of lessons learned for me. Is, look, I think that at Digital Asset we have a lot of very smart people. I think that your point around a movement is, if everything that you do is better than others, you'll always, in my opinion, fail. And not because maybe factually that's correct, that you are right about all of those things. I think a movement where they believe that they are also correct, regardless if they're more correct or less correct. And I think that one of the lessons learned, at least for me, has been that you really need to think about what really matters and what is the 80% that doesn't matter, right? Like really, like that, again, that 20-80. Like there's going to be 20% that you're like really non-negotiable, like really, like you have to insist on those things. And then there's 80% that you should just let go, or not let go, but just not fight to the death over. And I think in crypto, a lot of success stories in crypto didn't necessarily always have the best solution, but they've done a very good way of making people feel like they're part of a bigger thing. And I think that to me is one of the lessons learned. Is I think a Digital Asset, we made some mistakes early on of trying to be too many times right, but not smart overall, right? And that's something that over the last 5 years I think have changed dramatically, and we've learned how to focus really on what matters. And yeah, listen, I think it's a challenge, and I think that this is really what's unique about how together with our partners, we launched Canton. Actually, one of I think the unique things about Canton as a network is that the network rewards all that participate in the network, not just a few players in the network. So if you are a very successful app creator on the network, you're going to benefit from being a successful app creator. If you're a big user on the network, you're going to benefit from being a big user. And if you're one of the miners, or we call them super validators on the network, you're going to benefit. And I think that goes back to a lot of the lessons learned of saying, like, there shouldn't be just one, whether it's us or specific or a group of people that benefit and are right. And I think that that's really what have created a lot of the momentum over the last year or two.
Well, the word there that comes up for me is community. When it's an inclusivity that I hear. And you talk about, focus on what matters. And we all know Lance Ugler well. And, one of the things he tracks and measures not everything clearly, but many key.
He does measure everything.
Because he's really instilled, like, I now measure so much because, what gets measured improves. And I was curious, what are the key things that you measure that are important to the success of the business?
Yeah, so you said community. We call it a network. I think that there's things that we measure internally in terms of digital asset, but for us, the higher cause is the success of Canton. So what we are now looking at is the entities that are joining, the quality of the entities that are joining, the types of activity that is happening on the network, how fast it takes for people to get onboarded, performance. There's just, like, now that there's a whole community and there's a network, there's just so much that you could start gathering. One of the challenges is the whole point about Canton is the ability to do things with privacy, which makes it a bit challenging specifically on Canton to gather information, but that's one thing. And then in terms of digital asset, I think that one of the things that we are starting to really make sure we put an emphasis on is try to predict why we're doing certain things, meaning what is the ROI that we're trying to solve for in order to prioritize the work, and can we actually then measure, did we actually do a good job, right? So I think that another thing that as a founder I found out is very easy, and Lance actually told me about a story, I won't say what it is, but like that he had this dream and his gut told him this will be a big success. It's a good success. And they went and invested because the gut said it's going to be good, but they never actually measured it. And it's only the second that they start measuring, he was like, yeah, this needs to stop. It's just not working, right? And I think that, as entrepreneurs, again, back to this optimism, this idea that, like, oh my God, this is just such a great idea. And you don't sit down to quantify, why is it a good idea? What would it take? What are going to be the indicators that it's actually a good idea? It ends up being very hard then to shut them down because, yeah, there might be some incremental points that are getting better, but you don't look at it like, okay, I said it's going to hit these type of numbers and we're like so far away. Yeah, there's incremental improvement, but compared to what we said it's going to be, it's a complete disaster. So I think that one of the things that we're trying to do much more at Digital Asset is that when we invest in things, we try to quantify why we're making those investments, so then we can measure, are we actually achieving what we said we're going to?
Yeah. No, sorry. No, go on.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, it actually then makes the conversation about should we continue or not much easier because it contextualizes. You could say, listen, we all agree we haven't hit the numbers. And now you could just have a discussion. Now you could continue to be delusional and say, well, we didn't hit the numbers because of so many reasons. And it's still, you try to convince yourself that it's a good idea. But I think that it makes the conversation much more factual and easier to kind of rationalize of either continuing investing or actually shutting down some activities.
No, I was going to say that's right on, because it's differentiating momentum versus progress. And a lot of times, like we see momentum, we confuse that with progress. And I can assure you, working for Lance all those years, he measures everything and he tracks everything. So it's not fun working for Lance. So, for the benefit of the audience, though, like at a high level, what is Canton, and why should people care from that perspective?
Yeah, so this is going to be a bit of a long answer, but I want to contextualize and again back into crypto and why I think that blockchain is inevitable and why we were so excited about it. So and I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible, but like when you have an asset that you own and you want to, let's just say, take a loan against that asset, just very simple financial transaction. I think everybody can relate to that. A mortgage. When someone gives you the loan, they need to make sure that you can't take another loan against that asset, or you cannot sell it to someone else while the loan takes place. So there's what you call in financial services perfecting a security or encumbering the asset, and that simple transaction or simple function is very expensive in today's world. It's lawyers, it's accountants, like there's a lot of costs associated with this simple thing. And that's why many assets in the world, it's not trivial today to get a loan. And that's just one example of a financial services transaction. Now, the reason we got excited, and this is what crypto, effectively, the vision of crypto is, if you could put these assets on a blockchain or on a crypto network, you could actually do these transactions at a fraction of the dollar. Like that's the vision. So I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible, but like that simple example can apply to many other financial transactions. So you'll hear a lot of times people talk about the liberation of finance or the democratization of finance and making it really cheap and accessible. And I can give another example of something that happened without blockchain, which is what Robinhood did. US equities at the margin, trading 1,000,000 shares versus 1,000 shares versus 1 share versus half a share, did not really change. Like the marginal cost was the same. And therefore, Robinhood came and said, we're going to allow people to trade, half a shares, fractional of a shares. And suddenly that made it really compelling to retail investors to become active participants in the market. So if you can take this thought process, I think what crypto or blockchain is saying is we can reduce the marginal cost of certain financial transactions, which the end result should make it more inclusive. But if at the end of the day, because it's more affordable, you could also create a lot of financial transactions, financial products that today just wouldn't be even possible. Like they would be so cost prohibitive today that you wouldn't even think that it's worth making the investment, because the revenue or the profit margin would die before you even got started. So that's just the premise of crypto and blockchain in general. And I think that that's important to understand. Now, most crypto networks till today said, cool, we can put all assets on blockchain, and they've done that. Stablecoins is a great example of it working. I think that everybody understands that it's really the institutional adoption that is really going to kind of like tip it to like 10x or even 20x from where it is today. And to us, we took a lens of, well, what matters to institutional players? And it's not just regulated players, but it's institutional players. And for us, privacy and control were two things that were non-negotiable. Like, so it's like saying, would JP Morgan be okay if chase.com was public permission and you could just see everyone's account balances and everybody can just open an account? Like, no, that's like, everybody understand that wouldn't be possible, right? The internet wouldn't be what it is today if everything was public permissionless. So this idea that the world is not homogeneous and it's actually heterogeneous. Some websites are fully public permissionless, some because of either regulation or because they have financial reasons not to make their website, completely public, permissionless. And the internet as a protocol supports this heterogeneous set of websites that all come with different reasons of how they are constructed. So Canton takes the same idea about public chains or crypto networks, which is, it's not that the whole, the model is that everybody gets to see everyone's account balances, or everybody gets to see everything, or that everything needs to be private. So Canton is just really the only public chain today that allows a creator of a blockchain application to set its privacy settings and control settings of who can interact with an application, who gets to see what. That's really, at a high level, the only difference between Canton and other chains, but that we believe that small difference can make all the difference.
I feel like I've had an education there. That's super valuable. And I love, thank you. You explained it in layman's terms, which for me was certainly hugely valuable. I wanted to pivot slightly and to do a bit of a quick fire round but you can answer it in long form if you choose. But I had several questions, again, just so we get to know you a little bit more. And the first question was, a person who's inspired you in your career.
Don Wilson.
For what reason?
Oh, you want short form?
I know,
like I said,
I did, and then but then I've elaborated. I've changed the rules.
I find him to be a very fair boss. I mean, I wish if someone could say that I was a fair boss, that would be the biggest compliment. Because again, I think that it's back to this open-minded and low ego. You do well, you'll get respected. You don't do well, you'll get criticized. Allow you to kind of explore, build. I think DRW today is extremely diverse in what it does, because its leader have been very open-minded and haven't kind of said like, no, we're just like floor traders or electronic market makers, right? So to me, it's always been a big inspiration to see someone so successful maintain his low ego approach and open-mindedness, and then still being very fair. And that that to me is extremely inspiring.
Love that. A hidden talent you have.
Hidden. I'm very adaptable.
Okay, we like that. A ritual you have.
I don't have rituals.
No rituals. A quality you most value in others, which might be fairness, but yeah, a quality you most value in others.
Yeah, low ego. I mean, I keep on coming back to that. It's something that always is very important for me.
Out of interest, when you, I suppose you look around the industry, do you meet many low ego people? I'm curious. What's your experience?
I meet a good number of them. I think that they are there.
Yeah.
And I try to attach myself to those people.
I think they can often be a magnetic pull. There's like a gravitational force that brings low ego together. Your dream job outside of what you're doing now?
My dream job.
And that's not to say your current job isn't your dream job, but a dream job outside of what you're doing.
Teacher.
What would you teach?
Anything. I've taught during school. So while I was a student, I was taught high school students, and I was also the head of the teaching assistance program for computer science at Georgia Tech. Yeah, as someone who never finished high school, it was always I always wanted to think of different ways of how to educate.
Okay, so teacher, a superpower you would love to have?
Patience.
I wonder if would your team say that as well? I'm curious if there'd be an alignment there.
I think there will be a very, very strong alignment.
The legacy you want to leave?
Canton drives every financial transaction in the world.
One thing you can't work without.
My team will tell you my phone. Again,
Okay.
one of the complaints that I get.
What are the complaints that you're
I have to do too many things at the same time, so that's why I said my phone.
And I didn't have this in the quickfire round, but this has just come up as when you said that. I remember I asked Lance and the group a question when we did the book launch, but what's the worst thing you've ever read about yourself? And it was just quite fascinating. Lance's was like he's a plumber in a pinstripe suit. You know, that was way back when. What's the worst thing you've ever read about yourself?
I honestly don't have the worst thing. By the way, I always say that I'm in the plumbing business, so I actually like it. But if someone said that I'm in a suit, that would be terrible, because I don't like suits. Don't have an answer to that. Don't.
Okay,
I mean, listen, like I said, like during bad times, there were like negative articles, but it's like it was a small dent in the ego at that point in time. But like, I don't have an answer to the worst thing I've read about myself.
Okay, well, that's good, because then that shows there aren't lots of articles that are mischaracterizing you. And I'm trying to think what my last question is going to be here, because are you a reader or a podcast listener? I was going to ask, what's the best book, TV show that you've watched that others could get an insight into your interest?
Yeah, I'll tell you. So I, generally speaking, like if it's just for fun, there's a very long list, and probably if I said what the books that I enjoyed reading, you would kind of learn too much about me. But on the professional side, I generally say to people, I don't really like to read professional books. I find them to be not interesting. Like I just find that they're always it's it it tries to kind of like talk to the masses, and as a result of that, it kind of is very shallow. It's not. And as an entrepreneur, one of the books though that did actually impact me was actually the book about bad situations. So Ben Horowitz wrote a book, the Hard Things About Hard Things. And effectively he kind of says what I said, which is like, it's always easy to tell how to build a business, right? Like it's all very plain vanilla, but actually the businesses that really become super successful are those that really, dealt with the hard situation better than their peers, because every business will run into a bad situation. And at that point in time, it's like a fork in the road. It's like, what are you going to do? And that's really where like the good companies shine, because they dealt with a hard situation very well. And effectively he wrote a book about, as an entrepreneur, what were the hard situations in his career, and hopefully you can drive some inspiration out of it. And I have to say that during some of the hard moments at Digital Assets, I remember me and my colleague actually went to the book and was like, you remember that chapter in this book? This is where we are. And there was some inspiration. So that's one book. And then the second book that I always recommend, and I have copies always in my office, is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. I think it's just a masterpiece that everybody should read.
I think we're in the business of people, and I've got Dale's book by my bed, and I've got the Hard Thing About Hard Things, which I'll be taking on holiday when I go tomorrow to reread that one. Well, look, from my side, it's been an absolute pleasure. I always enjoy our conversations. I think you're so insightful and inspiring. I think what you're doing is very inspiring in the world. Kiet, what would you like to share?
No, I mean, Yuval, thank you for being on. It's been extremely insightful. I guess the where I want to leave it is, if the audience wants to learn more about Canton, like where can they go?
Sure. So you go to canton.network is the landing page. And then hopefully soon the name of the foundation, which is currently Global Synchronization Foundation under Linux, is going to change to a more Canton-related name. But Canton.network is a good place to start, or to come to our website, digitalasset.com.
Great. Thank you, Yuval, and thank you for the audience for your continued support. We look forward to hearing back from you again soon. Have a good one, everybody.
Thank you.